All right, guys, welcome back to the podcast. This is Dr. Steve Noser, your host, and joining me today is Dr. Jason Richardson. And Dr. J's background is interesting, not only from the standpoint that he is, I guess, what do you call it? You're an Olympic mindset coach. Is that how you phrase it yourself?
Yeah. So I've worked with, been the last, Japan, Brazil, Rio, and London. Yeah. So I've gone to those three Olympics as a mindset coach for Olympians.
Coach. Yeah. But yeah. I mean, beyond that, just to give people who are listening a little bit more context, you're a very high level competitive athlete. BMX racing was your thing. Pan Am championships, world championships. So you're very, very accomplished in that. And along the way, interwoven with all your competition, you got your MBA in global marketing, you got your doctorate in psychology, and this has somehow intertwined and then spun off to the version of Dr. J that sits here talking to me right now, which is, I would imagine, an amalgamation of all these different points of interest that coalesced into something that you seem to be really good at and quite obviously you're passionate about. So, you know, you and I were just talking before we got into the introduction about what we want to talk about today, but can you spend a little bit of time just kind of telling your origin story, like what your background is and what maybe drives you to be as competitive as you are and how that translates into what you're doing now in terms of mindset coaching, which, by the way, obviously doesn't apply only to athletes. So if you're listening, you're not an athlete, don't tune out, right?
So and we'll get into that. It'll become very apparent that what I do, I do it outside of the athletic world, but it's what I do really is intended to help someone perform in life, honestly. So origin story, I'll start with, I was a kid growing up, like any kid was growing up somewhere in the world, but my somewhere was New Jersey. And then I moved to Las Vegas in the middle of 8th grade, and then came to San Diego for school, for college. And I had always raced a BMX bike because my older brother raced and I was just following him along. But I didn't start to see success until I'd probably say my early teens in racing. So I started to become a nationally ranked amateur. And then I really turned pro because I thought I was going to have to quit when I started university. So it was just, back then there was just two levels of pro, kind of like in baseball, there's kind of like your minor league and major league. But instead of getting called up, you had to make a certain amount of money to move up to the highest level. Yeah. So got to college and realized I didn't want to work a part-time job. And I did have a sponsor racing, but I'd kind of goofed off a bit in that lower ranking pro class and, didn't take it as seriously. But they said, hey, you only have 5 races left, or you only have 5 races for your contract because, so that's what we can do for you. So that was pretty much like, all right, the clock is running. So that meant to me, I had 5 races up to the highest level. And then, so anyways, as it turns out, I was able to do that. I don't want to say a winning streak, but I definitely got some good results in, made some money. I was $300 shy of I think it was a $2,000 or $3,000 goal to move up. And I said, well, I have one more race left under contract that they're going to pay for. I said, well, if I'm going to have them pay, if they're going to pay for one more race, they're going to pay for me as a AA pro versus a single A pro. And I decided to bump myself up. And I also said, knowing my luck, something dumb will happen. And then I'll miss out on the, making the $300 at this race because it's very hard to make money racing a bicycle, especially just as it pertains to winning prize money. So I bumped myself up. And lo and behold, I got in the finals. I did quite well. My sponsor said, hey, you can still wear the stuff and we'll send you products, but we just can't pay for you to keep going like this. And so I was fortunate enough to find another sponsor who took me on, and I still had to pay for my own travel, but I would use the money I would win at one race to get me to the next race, And I was doing this while I was in school. So that was my part-time job. And as with anything, timing's always helpful. So BMX seemed to be back on an upswing. There were some TV contracts. So we were, some of our races were on ESPN2. That was somewhat new. And then Fox Sports Network, that was somewhat new of a thing. And so they're looking to fill up airtime with stuff. And one of the big bike companies, they were funding a lot of, funding a TV show, basically advertising for their own bike. But in the process, we were on TV 2 or 3 or 4 times a month on a couple between 2 stations. So people started, climbing on board to sponsor this thing called BMX racing and sponsor people. Anyways, long story bearable, I was able to get that small so that contract that just paid for my entry fees turned into a contract that paid for my flights and entry fees and gave me a small salary. And then that turned into a new contract with a bigger bike company that paid me like an adult, a proper salary with bonuses. So long story bearable, I was able to graduate college and buy a house. So I graduated in, May of 97 and bought a place in September of 97. So I'm a 20-some-year-old kid, 21 or 22, however old it is when you graduate. And I had a track in my backyard and a house, and I'm traveling the world riding a bike and racing. And then that was my life for quite a long time. Now, in the meantime, I did always go to school. And candidly, part of it was some foresight, the proverbial fallback plan. But the other piece was, I need to find a way to keep. Really was like it was me kicking the can down the road for finding a real job. So I went on to get my MBA, and then again kept racing, and I actually had a resurgence a bit in my career actually after I got married and turned 30. But then I was injured, broke my leg. It was funny. I was just cleaning off my desk and I came across those old, where is it? It's right here. Actually, these are all the old X-ray films from that. It's a very heavy file. So shattered my leg and decided to keep racing, but on the way back from that, like my third race back, so it was like an 8-month kind of ordeal, and I started racing again. I was sitting next to a couple on an airplane, and they were psychologists, and I asked them, "How does it work? What's the schooling like? How long does that take?" And I had worked with a sports psychologist in my career, which was really instrumental in the longevity of my career and me figuring out some other things in my life, lo and behold. So I got off that plane and I said, okay, I'm going to be a psychologist. I'm going to plug myself back into my sport. I want to be the guy who is the action sport guy, because there really, at least then, I didn't know a person who had competed at my level and was a psychologist. And I figured I'd be the perfect person, not only to help people perform, but to transition from amateur to pro or pro to the real world. And then and everything in between. So that's what I did. And then I was in school in 2007, I think. Yes, definitely in 2007, because I won the Pan Am Games in 2007. So I was in school January 2007, doctored in 2010, licensed in 2011, on the plane to the Olympics with an athlete in 2012.
And you had a transition that many successful athletes have in different sports, and that is you got into the world of commentating.
Mm-hmm.
And was that on ESPN, or was that just in local tournaments that were not televised?
Interesting. It's interesting. I've always so what happened. So when we were on, they were doing the TV and filming the races, I always liked being interviewed. Not only because it was great for my sponsors, but and they liked interviewing me because I it was just a good match. They liked interviewing me. I liked being interviewed. I'm using quotes. I was an articulate athlete. So apparently that's a surprise to people, or it was back then. But I was always racing. So commentating in racing is weird. But I went to a race with an athlete, one of the World Cup events as a psychologist, working as a mental skills coach. And one of the people who normally interviewed the riders wasn't there. And then, because everyone's communicating on text on the back channels, and like, oh, well, you should have Jason do it if he's there. Because I had had fun in the past, like every now and then a one-off race, or just like hosting an event. And I'd taught seminars and clinics for bike racing. So I was comfortable on a mic and on a camera. Anyways, so I did that. And it worked really well because I knew what questions they ask. I knew some of the riders. So I had all those little insights that a color commentary person would have. And then that turned into, hey, you're going to be at the next one? Yeah. Do you want to do this? Sure. And then it turned into traveling to the races to be a commentator versus working with the athletes,
right?
Which was great. I mean, because from a person who went from racing and, going to a race with wanting to, get a specific position or place or earn a certain amount of money, and then even as a psychologist traveling with racers, knowing they wanted to get a specific place or position but this was great. Commentating was great because it didn't matter what the outcome was. All I had to do was talk about what I saw on the monitor or on the track. And I'm like, this is what I should have been doing the whole time, because then it was like, oh man, I get the best of both worlds. I get to be at the races and I get to talk about racing, and it does not matter who wins or loses, because either way, my outcome is the same.
Yeah, so the pressure was off.
But then
to
after
some extent.
after COVID, that all changed, and they brought some of the production in house, and so I don't do as much commentating. I only moonlight as a commentator every now and then. So I did a couple races last year on the mountain bike side, and a couple races on the mountain bike side / road gravel side, and so I'll moonlight as that. But my core competency is coaching individuals and speaking to groups.
Yeah. And I can't remember if it was when we were talking before we started the episode, but, we talked about transferability of skills and, how a winning mindset, it doesn't matter if you're an athlete or if you're a business person or if you're crying out loud, like, stay at home mom or dad or whatever the case is. A winning mindset is a winning mindset. But, something struck me when you were talking about the early stages of your career before you got all the attention, or that particular industry got all the attention. It seemed to me that you had an awareness, like when you look at a sport, there's the training aspect, there's the competition aspect, but it seemed like you had an understanding that there was another layer, at least another layer. And that was like how the game is played. Right? How do you get sponsors? How do you work with sponsors? How do you attract more information or more attention? And how does that translate into different types of success other than just, hey, I'm winning or I'm placing and I'm on the podium?
Right.
And that thought process, like, I think it's unusual. I think there's a lot of athletes that are just really good athletes, but they don't necessarily understand how that larger game is played. And it just made me wonder how that might translate into our business. Like, try to pivot the conversation, because to be honest, I could listen.
So I love that question.
Yeah.
And I think I know where you're going. So as I was on the plane talking to the psychologist, I'm thinking so not only does being a psychologist suit me as a person and my strengths and all of that, but from a business model, it was music to my ears, because as they're talking to me, and even I remember sitting in class, like, doing makeshift pro formas on my notepad, like, okay, this many clients and this many hours, and like just essentially working out my business plan, or a business plan. I figured I could totally plug myself in, and it was the same business model as when I was a racer. It's like, okay, position myself as this, package myself as this, this is the message, this is my market, this is the value proposition, and this is what you will get, or we will do. And so to me, it just seems super simple. It actually seemed easier than, being a professional racer, because trust me, there were times where going to a company and convincing them that me pedaling a bike fast was going to, connecting that to sales is not always easy.
Yeah.
Unless you're literally a Jordan or an Armstrong or a, take your pick. So, and professional sport teams are different because the team wants to win and you're a valuable member of the team. But in individual sport, it's, some bikes are going to sell anyway.
Yeah.
Anyways. So I did get that, how the game was played. And I felt like that was my strong point, was putting myself out there.
Yeah.
Which was fortunate. And I think that also, and that totally translated into my work as a psychologist, because even from a performance perspective, and let's get out of even, sports, but say I'm working with an entrepreneur or business executive, there are people, high performance, you will always be noticed and or move up. That said, in many situations, not all, but many, some people who move up are the ones who are noticed. Some people move up who are the ones who speak. So, I've said it before, I said it again, the smartest and the best and the brightest don't always get to the top. And so that's a tricky thing, but it's an important thing to know and understand and incorporate into your DNA. Because one, candidly, I wasn't the best or the brightest or the smartest all the time. So that means, hey, you can still compete. You don't have to be an Elon Musk to build a great company. It'd be nice, but you don't have to be.
Right.
But the other piece is it's on you to find a way to show up so that you are attracting or getting the business you want, whatever that is. Because the truth is, while I wasn't the best, brightest, the smartest, I was definitely well qualified, sometimes overqualified, and definitely the right pick. But people are living their lives, doing their own things, and they have their own, lists of emails or calls, or back in the day, voicemails they had to get back to. And so unless you learn how to nudge, you may not get the call.
Yeah.
And earlier on in my racing career, because of the ebbs and flows of the sport, a lot of the sponsorships that I had gotten, of all the sponsorships I've gotten, I can think of two that actually approached me and said, hey, will you ride for us? The other ones was kind of a knock on the door. Hey, I think I have something that might be of interest to you.
Yeah. Are
you open to having a conversation about the possibility of me, riding for you?
Yeah.
And then that's how it started.
That's how it started. So let me, if you don't mind me,
wrong. Yeah.
If you don't mind me interrupting, let me try to translate, because one of the things that I wanted to talk to you about is this phenomena, which clearly isn't unique to functional medicine, but there are a lot of very smart, very experienced clinicians who are just simply good clinicians that are not necessarily successful. If you define success simply as having a very busy, high dollar producing practice. And I've talking bad language. I've spoken to a lot of people who are very good clinicians who struggle to create success defined that way. And I'd like to have another conversation about, what is success? But they express a lot of almost disappointment, dissatisfaction that that the game is kind of rigged, that it's not the most talented clinician who is the most successful doctor or practitioner of some kind. And I don't know how to help people understand that. And I don't know that I understand it myself, because I consider myself to be an above average clinician. I'm certainly not the best clinician. I've had a certain measure of success myself. I don't know that I could put my finger on exactly why. So I'm wondering if there's like, what's the magic formula? Because clearly having an elite level of skill, knowledge, or expertise is not the only thing that's required. And so what do you say to anybody who's listening right now who is in that position of like, I don't get it. I'm a really good provider. I'm a really good practitioner. Why don't I have more patients? Or why can't I keep patients coming back? Or whatever the hang up is that they have. Like how do you help someone sort that out and to get that to the point where they understand the problem that they can go about trying to fix it?
Right. So many of us have a friend. He lives on our shoulder, and his name is Chip.
Is what? Oh, Chip?
And his name is Chip.
Chip, yes.
Yeah. And so we want to be careful of that chip on our shoulder, aka resentment. At the very best, just grumbleness, but it's usually resentment, right? And how did Chip get there? What belief is driving that? And you might be the best clinician, but whatever that is, if there's a metric for that,
right?
Like I've raced many races. I wasn't the fastest person, but I've won some of them where I wasn't the fastest. I've gone to some and been the fastest and haven't won. So, we started this conversation. There is a bit of luck and timing with that. But I can tell you, if you take accountability, right, regardless of whose fault it is or what's going on in the market, and say, okay, what can I do that can help me not be the clinician I want, but be the type of clinician I want to be, or have the type of business I want? What can I do? That's where we start getting into some conversations where we might be able to find the weak link in our business or business system or marketing,
right, or
operations. That's where we start to find out if we have some funny money scripts going on in our own head, or we have if we're getting in our own way. And if in fact you aren't willing to do some things that other people are doing, by the way, you don't have to do what the other person's doing, but there are some fundamentals, like in any practice, like in any sport, like in any thing you do, there are fundamentals that exist, right? Core fundamentals. But if you aren't willing to do some of them, then you're going to want to reconcile with the fact that your business will be where it is. And by the way, you can be happy with that, right? But if you're not happy with that, so if you're here and you want to be here, if you're at a 6 and you want to be at a 10, that distance between that, there's only two ways to reconcile that. And that is to do what it takes to become a 10, or scale down what a 10 is.
Right.
So it matches up. I don't know how else to explain it, but I always, so if you do work in the weight loss space, like many of us probably have, I always tell people, and I don't mean to disparage anyone. I don't mean to, but there are plenty of fat, happy people.
Yeah.
Right? You don't, like, at the end of the day, this is your body. This is your life. The last 10 pounds or 20 pounds or all of the 100 pounds that you think you need to lose, I'm using air quotes, doesn't have to be, but recognize, your knees might hurt if you're carrying more weight. Your heart might work a little harder if you're carrying more weight, right? You might have less years than you would want if you're carrying more weight, right? And if you can be okay with that, and I mean be okay with it, like in your heart of hearts, then hey, God bless you. Live your life, be at peace. But if you're not at peace with that, it's like, okay, then we're starting to get into, you can't have your cake and eat it too conversations. Like,
right.
Look, what are we complaining about? But what I've realized in the world of helping people, and it's unfortunate, but it's also, and I'm not saying this to, I'm just going to speak, it's going to sound harsh, but it doesn't, but I think we're all capable of this. I think sometimes we let our problems define us. And I think sometimes we let our problems give us substitute for significance. And so, like I say, if you have no problem, you have no problem. And as a psychologist, especially because I didn't get my hours working with the San Diego Padres, okay, I did a lot of clinical work. I've noticed that, barring, severe mental illness or disorders, a lot of people fight for their problems. You might point out, some silver linings. And then there's the, oh yeah, but, right? We start getting into the ants, the automatic negative thoughts. Oh, well, I only won the race because so-and-so wasn't there. I got lucky. It's like, okay, well, if you, and then, so then the question is, why do you need to defend your anxiety or defend this kind of, this kind of maladaptive train of thought we have going on right now? So
it makes me think like sometimes I have to have conversations with my clients, and I like to use clients instead of the word patient, because patient to me is sick.
Agreed.
Right. So I use the word client. So sometimes I'll have to have a conversation, and it's usually the form of a question, which is like, do you believe that whatever your health challenges are part of who you are, or it's just something that's happening to you? Because I think the distinction between when somebody takes ownership of their health issues, it's a lot harder to get them to let go and to see the possibility that with some changes and taking ownership and accountability and persistence over time, they can be in a different and a better place. Like, these people are almost always unhappy with their health in some respect. That's why they're talking to me. But I try to be very, very aware of this particular mindset, because I think it can sabotage a very good process. Like, I can give someone the most amazing functional medicine program that the world has ever seen. But if someone defines themselves by their health issues and problems, and it's part of their identity, that's really not going to work the way that I wanted to. So I'd like you to comment on that. But let's spin that around and talk about the clinician, because you talked about this. If you're a 6 and you want to be a 10, I think there's a tendency in our field and maybe it's just a subset, for clinicians to think, well, for me to be more successful, I have to master a higher degree of physiology or clinical applications. And so they spend most of their time going from seminar to seminar to seminar to seminar, learning more clinical stuff.
Yeah, it's a circuit. I've seen it.
Yeah, but then, they come back and they still can't translate all that increased clinical knowledge and expertise into a measure of success if you define that more than just, I know more than I did before. And I'm sure there's a question in there somewhere. I just don't know what it is.
No, so we'll get, so I think to kind of button up both of those points, because I get a little bit excited and I trail off. So my apologies for that. It comes down to defining your success. Defining your success. And this is something I do with athletes, executives, everyone. Let's take time to define what the win is for you.
Right.
Not what you think and by the way, so when I ask people what they want, it's not so that they say the right thing, and it's not so that but what happens is there is a chatter about, in our heads about what we think we're supposed to be as X, right? And it's no one's fault. It's so for instance, I tell people I'm a psychologist, and then I get the jokes. Oh, are you going to psychoanalyze me? They think of the person with the tweed jacket, with the elbow patches, and that's just the thought. And then they think of, the hang the shingle up and the typical, so there is a trope out there, but there's many tropes out there that just pop in our head because we'll just call it in the ether. Again, this is your life. This is your business. What do you want your business to look like? What do you want your life to look like? It doesn't have to be a big house with picket fences and a practice of 40 people. It could be, you're living the Airbnb life and you keep 3 high-level paying clients every year, and that's it. It could be that. Right. Great. And maybe you moonlight it and do pro bono work. Like, if that's what you want to do and that's a win for you, then let's make that plan. If it is multiple locations and possible franchises. Okay, let's work for that. But I want it to come from your, like I say, your heart. Like I want that to be like coming from your heart of hearts, not just like, this is what I think I'm supposed to do because that's what, is dictated by the, the profession or
right.
the whatever.
Yeah.
What is a win to you?
Yeah.
Right. Recognizing everyone has obligations and bills to pay and all these other things. And then we can actually start having the conversation about the ways to get to that success. And I'm sure you've seen it where you do. I've worked with clinicians who've had plenty of clients and they wish they weren't that successful. I'll put it that way.
Absolutely.
And I've seen clinicians who, having trouble getting one or two people in the door. So somewhere between that is probably where people want to be. But the question is, you're going to want to live with it. And by the way, you're not done once you're done. Because once you're there, whatever the there is, so we take this path, this journey, call it, this walk up the mountain. We get to the top of the mountain, but what happens when you get to the top of the mountain? You get to see other things, right? Your view has changed. And so you might realize, actually, I kind of like the smaller mountain. Or actually, I see a bigger one over there. Or actually, I want to chip at this mountain and give some of it away. I don't know. But you choose.
Yeah.
And it keeps going. And this is the deal. We keep that, or this is the responsibility, is we keep taking time to define the win. And it's until, and this will work, this is for early graduates and career people too, making a decision and moving toward it. It may not be the right thing to do, but if you're brave enough to pick something that you think you like or might like or want to do, and if you're brave enough to pursue it, I promise you the thing that you're supposed to move closer to will eventually, you'll either see it or it'll come to you or it'll appear or you'll get the idea of, okay, maybe it wasn't this thing I thought.
Yeah, you get clarity.
It's actually this other thing. But unless you make that choice and start moving toward that initial thing, it's probably not going to happen.
Yeah. So let me, and I'll share this. I've shared this on prior interviews. I can't remember who it was, but somewhere in the last 6 months, I shared this. I was teaching a blood chemistry functional medicine course it was in Manhattan. And there was a young doctor there. He was the clinician. His wife ran the office. And, in the midst of a weekend seminar, you talk a lot of old personal stuff. And so I had explained that I was, kind of like a micro practice. It was more boutique style and it was just me. I don't have any staff. And so the guy asked me, he said, "Can I talk to you on a break?" And I said, "Sure." So the next break, we went off into this little side room and he started to explain how he and his wife had built this really large, really thriving practice. And I'm like, "No, that's great." And his eyes started to tear up and he's like, "No, it's not." He said, we feel like we're dying. He said, when we started out, we just really thought that what we had to do, what we were compelled to do is to build the largest practice, to see the most amount of people, to bill the largest and collect the largest amount of money. He said, but we don't want it and we don't know how to get out of it. And my heart broke for this guy. It broke for this guy. I didn't have an answer for him other than my own story of, I had started my career this way and then I realized I don't want this. And I made a very abrupt change. It just happened to coincide with the economy crash of 2008. So, maybe that was fortuitous, but I found myself in a position where I was forced to reinvent myself. And I took the time to sit back and go, okay, what do I really want? And I think a lot of people just get busy, especially when you build a machine that has to be constantly fed to keep it alive. It seems like you don't have a lot of time to really sit back and reflect and ask yourself these deep questions. And I'll use that to pivot into something else. I saw this on your website. You have a short promotional video and you start out and it's just a video of you in a seminar environment. And you said, we live our lives in domestic silos and our professional life is separate from our home life. And I understand that. And, it's, on one hand, I think, isn't compartmentalization a useful strategy? And maybe it's just not useful all the time. But the older I get, and hopefully the wiser I get, it seems to me that you have to have a unifying strategy to make sure that all of these silos are in cohesion with each other, so that you're not driving
or on the same farm.
Oh, yeah, perfect. So I'm gonna let me toss that over to you and get your thoughts on that, because it just really sparked a lot of recognition with me with how I see and think. So yeah, go ahead, please.
So you should know that that video was done at a workshop with clinicians.
Okay.
So and many of them, some of your people might know, they're players in that world. But yes, we do. We live our lives. And look, there is a time. So when we're going to go, when Jordan's at the free throw line, or I should say LeBron now, when LeBron's at the free throw line, right? Yes, we do want to take the fact that, the pipe burst in the kitchen earlier that morning. It's a home game in LA.
Yeah.
The pipe that we want to put that on the shelf.
Yeah.
Okay. That's something to put on the shelf. And focus on our form and our breath work and, the 3 bounces, and then, setting up and making sure our fingers and hands are just so before we release the free throw. Okay. There's a time and place for compartmentalization. But you better believe that over time, if those things at home aren't being taken care of, that over time, if the work thing is not satisfying, over time, if the health portion is lacking, it's going to affect the home thing or the work thing.
Yeah.
It just is. You can't escape the fact that you're human. You can't escape the fact that things overlap. We can't escape the fact that life gets messy as best as we can do to keep things clean and tidy. And we can't escape the fact that, yes, we will be sitting in the meeting and at the same time, or worrying about our son who might be struggling in math class. That is a fact. So I'm just spilling the milk that's on the table. It's like, okay, let's look at this here. What are we going to do with this? Right. And I ask people, which is the whole ethos of, and I guess we'll get to it later, but I wrote a book called More, Better, Happier. And that's the whole ethos behind it is that why don't we take the time to back out of our work self and our play self and our family self, and back out and to kind of say, okay, how do I want all of this to look?
Right.
And not only that, to the extent that I can, if it were all aligned or working in sync, I should say, what would that look like? It might mean a few $1,000s less a month or a week or whatever your income is. It might mean that. It might mean exponentially more if you actually get it in order.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah.
But again, just like when I say defining the win, whether it's in your business or sport, why not define the win in your life? What does that look like?
Yeah. And so I guess that brings the question to my mind. Like, do you find that when you coach with people that they just don't, number one, they don't know what success looks like for them. And when they go to define it, they tend to constrain it to one of those silos. Like success it's all about business rather than that integrated picture.
So the more, better, happier, more, better, happier. So the more, and I am /was/am guilty of it, right? We go in and out of these things. We look at success as, I'll just call it money and things, right? What's going to bring me money? What's going to be able to get me the things I want? And that is success, right? You're at the top of your field and whatever that is, and you're commanding a certain price. Great. And hopefully that's what you want. But when they come to me, they want either more, right? The money and things category, and I'm oversimplifying. Or they come to me and they want the better category. And that is, I'm out of shape. Or with athletes, I want to be faster. I want to be in better shape. I want to be, I fall apart at the main event. Why am I choking, right? They want to be better. And then there's the happier category. And I will put that in the relationships and good with self category.
Yeah.
And I don't mean happy like going down a roller coaster and partying, although that can be inclusive of happy. I mean, happy is in like, you are really good with yourself and what you're doing, right? Who you are as a person. And they're asking for one of those things, right? They either wanted this, or this. And I started saying, well, why is it important that they have the corner office or the C-suite or the right car? Why is it important that they are able to fit in the wedding dress again or have the washboard abs? Why? I mean, I shouldn't ask this, but why is it important that you feel guilty that you haven't called your college roommate in 5 years, or that you haven't hung out with why does, what is behind those things? And so I created my own Venn diagram of those, where it's like, well, maybe it's because you think, or actually know, that by getting that thing, you're actually going to get at the thing that's behind that, right? There's some kind of level of deeper or higher level of validation, or dare I say fulfillment, that you're looking for, right? And clearly we know just having the abs and the great body ain't enough. And clearly we know that just being the life at the party ain't enough. And clearly we know that just having the money in the house ain't enough.
Right.
We know this intellectually, but we act, again, we put it in these silos. We act as if, it's somehow untrue. And so I ask people and push people and nudge people and kick them, maybe, to ask themselves, like, what does it all look like?
Yeah.
And why? Why does it look like?
Yeah.
And be honest about what's really making you happy. Even with my business, I have the personality to have multi-practices. I have, but I don't want that. And it took to let some of that go. It took actually quite a bit, because there's like a lot of ego involved, and there's a lot of, all this other stuff. It's like, no, but lo and behold, being able to let some of that, what I think I should be doing, go to what I really am built and want to do, like, is allowing me to be more successful in ways that I hadn't thought. Like that's the dirty little secret of this. And my wife said to me the other day, where are we? I said, oh, let's go do this and get a coffee. And she's like, I don't want to do that, but I want to hang out with you. I'm like, wow, that was like the best thing I've heard any day. Like, but just that little, I'm just here to hang out with you.
Yeah. Like we don't have to do anything. I just want to hang out. Like
that is huge. And I say that as a clinician who's had the guy who's retired at 45 and, sleeping in a separate bed than his spouse. Like, that's not cool, right? So, and I'm not saying that to pat myself on the back. I'm saying that if we are brave enough to tell ourselves the truth, or even, dare I say, if we are brave enough to not lie to ourselves, because there's a difference. It's like, you might be surprised what's on the other end of that. And then you're working the system, which is this more, better, happier ethos that, I'm not the only person who came up with it, but that's how I name it. But,
sure.
But that's the whole ethos behind it. Because usually it's the money. And I don't get me wrong. I want people to make as much money as they want to make. So I'm not here to say you have to be, a $30,000 a month person to be considered X. I'm not saying you need to have. I am saying be honest with yourself about what you want.
Right.
Right. And if you're connected to people, have the ability, right, and wherewithal to communicate to them what's important to you and why, and see if we, right, whoever your we is, can develop a plan to help facilitate that to the extent that you can.
Right.
Okay. Look, if you want to be a professional basket weaver, look, there's a market, right? I get there's a market for certain things and not. So my head's not in the clouds on this. But these are the real conversations that I push people to have with themselves and with their teams and with their family.
Is it a general rule that it's usually catastrophe that wakes somebody up to the point that they've siloed themselves in one way to the point where they're ignoring other silos that, when it really comes down to it, are quite important to them?
I don't know that it's a general rule. I think we are. So it's a feature and a bug of the human brain that we tend to be very cognizant of what's going wrong. Right? We're designed to survive and look for threat or perceived threat. And we, as humans, are very resilient, and we are so technologically advanced that we can get away with a lot. Okay, so that's kind of like a bad mix, right? That makes for very well. Just think of the kid who parents keep bailing them out, no matter and it gets worse and worse and worse, right? Then but we're that kid too. I mean, think about how much your body compensates for the bad stuff you put into it. Think about your musculature, your literally your frame, your skeletal system that literally compensates for a bump or a bruise or a fracture. Like, you can get away with a lot. And so it really takes a broken femur, right? Or, the divorce papers, or whatever it might be, whatever that punch in the face is, I shouldn't say it takes, it can take that. And the truth is, that's how politicians get elected. They show you the punch in the face, they show you the broken femur, they show you that, and then it's like, I can fix it.
Yeah.
Right? But the responsible thing is, hey, crowd, check it out. I love you. I want you to win. Let's create a plan to where we give ourselves the best opportunity to win. That's not sexy. That's just not. And our brain, it's hard to latch on to that. So, but you as an individual can. I mean, there is something you want, I hope. And if there's nothing you want, then great. Then maybe that's like to keep things the way they are. But even that requires effort. Sustainability is effort.
Yeah.
So what is that? And I think over time, because especially licensed professionals, there's a very clear path. There's school, then there's tests, and then there's hours, and then there's another exam of some sort to state or country or both. And then you put up this shingle, right? And then maybe even in that, as being a clinician, like you reach a certain level, and then, but once you're kind of there, right? And so I've seen it with business professionals, I've seen it with athletes. You kind of get to a there, whatever that is, and then you realize you haven't plotted your other there. And you're moving along at it, and that's fine. But again, it is good that we revisit what we want and why.
It just struck me that when you hung out your shingle as a psychologist, you had already had a degree of success in many different endeavors that you had gone into. One of the complaints that I'll hear from, and in fact, I had this complaint, all of my graduating class, when I graduated chiropractic school, had the same complaint, was that we learned all this great clinical stuff. We didn't learn anything about business.
That's right.
And
psychologists say it, MDs say it,
okay,
dentists say it. Keep going.
Yeah, so I'm just, you kind of come out with these unrealistic expectations of what it takes to, number one, what success is and what it takes to get there, to the point where, again, success is generally defined, if you're a clinician, as having a thriving practice. Typically that means high volume, high dollars. And it almost, you buy into this fantasy that as a chiropractor, all you have to do is be the best adjuster in your city. Or as a functional medicine person, you just have to be the best at changing someone's diet and giving them supplements or diagnosing certain problems. But, quite clearly, there's a game behind the skill. And that's why I started the conversation back by saying, like, when you were racing, very early on, you realized there's not just the training in the race itself. there's the game behind all of those things, which is much bigger than any individual race. And I think that it's the same thing, because I unfortunately learned through a lot of bad mistakes or painful mistakes. I've never had catastrophe in the sense that, my marriage fell apart or any of those different things. But there are things that have happened in my life that have made me sit back and force myself to go, what do I want out of life? And that's when I started thinking, well, it's about more than just the business side of things or clinical success. It's about having time to do the things that I want with the people I love. And I know that you know a little bit about my story, but I've been part of moderate to large size practices that are doing $200,000 a month. And I've gone out on my own and just tried to recreate that, only to have it fail when the economy crashed with the real estate bubble back in 2008. And that's when I was forced to go, okay, what do I really, really want? And it's almost like it took me several iterations of defining something that I want, going after it, and like you said, kind of getting there and going like, this isn't really what I want. I think I want this, and then kind of changing and shifting things and multiple levels, multiple iterations to the point where I'm pretty darn happy where I am. I don't know that I could sit down and map it out in a way that makes sense to everybody else or maybe informs them, because I'm sure everybody's path is going to be different. But I guess the question is, does it start with understanding what success is and being able to define it for yourself? And are you adamant that people think more in terms of firing on all cylinders, if I can use that, like the more, better, happier, like firing on all of those cylinders? To be truly successful, you have to have success in all of those domains. Is that a fair statement?
Yeah, I would argue, we're getting a bit, is it existential or metaphysical here, or both?
Yeah.
I might even call it out in my book. I said, look, maybe you really are in it for the money, and that's enough for you. I get it. Sure. Like I'm not here to say that's wrong, but I will challenge and say, okay, even if you're in it just for the money, don't you think being healthier would help you earn more? I didn't say it in those words, right?
Right.
Don't you think that decent relationships would help foster that? Right? At the very least. We can get into like personality and manipulative behavior, this, that, and the other. But my point is, which is deeper psychological stuff.
Yeah.
But I would still argue that those things would be in play. And I also, I've had to push back on clients, and maybe they're just not the client for me. But I've had to push back and kind of really force them to look at, why do they, or we keep going back to this very specific area when a lot of your problems seem to be stemming from these other areas.
Yeah.
And that's treatment, right? Really.
Yeah.
And it whether it's habit or personality or environment or whatever, a mix of all of that. So I think to answer your question about success, you define your success. You do. What I do know in working with people is I may know what you need, but if I can't help you get what you want, we'll never get to what you need.
Right.
And so, I even Olympic Training Center, I'm doing a coaching seminar for would-be coaches. And I said, well, why are they there? Why are your athletes there? And they're like, they're there to win. I'm like, no, they're not. But every coach pretty much thought, yes, they're there to win. Of course they're there to win. Why else? No, they're not. Because, some of them, like, really, this might just be an escape from a really crappy neighborhood or family situation. Some of them, it could be social. Some of them, it could be fame. There's reasons, right? I'm not saying they wouldn't like to win, but that might not be why they're there.
Yeah.
That might not be what they want.
That's funny you say that.
If you as the coach can have a conversation, huh?
I'm sorry to interrupt, but I was an athlete. I played basketball and volleyball at college and beyond for a while. It never bothered me to lose if I laid everything out on the court. I love to compete. And if I won, great. But if I didn't, if I tried my best, I was happy because I loved competing. I loved pitting myself against somebody else who might beat me and maybe they don't. That's what I loved. I wasn't in it for the victory. I was in it for the process of seeing maybe I can win, maybe I can't.
And so if you can tap into that as the coach, you probably will end up winning by default over time.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
If you can tap into what that person wants, I want to win. I want to be famous. I want to be safe, right? Because traveling I'm serious, because traveling on the road with this bunch of knuckleheads that races bikes or throws a ball is safer than being back in my old neighborhood or being with an abusive parent. Understood. I'm dead serious. I've seen that.
Yeah, no, I get it.
And so it's like, okay, man, let's help you get what you want. Oh, and by the way, I'm helping you. What I want is for you to execute this play.
Yeah.
If you're the coach. Right? What I would want is for this, right? And now we're on the same page. And then that's where we will get what we need, is my point.
Right. So that makes me think of there was something else, a statement that I read on your website, and I think it applies here because number one, you're hoping the athlete understands why they're there. And I think sometimes they might not. But
they might not, and that's
right. And I guess that's part of just the coaching process and relationship is to help people understand those things. So, but you have the statement. I'm going to read the statement, and then I'm going to maybe wax poetic for a while, and then I'll ask you a question.
Yeah, please do.
You said that the championship life requires that you recognize and play on your strengths while recontextualizing your weaknesses. And now I know that there are different attitudes on what you do with strengths and weaknesses. Like, should you just play to your strength because that's your strength and hope your weaknesses don't take you down? Do you do the work to shore up your weaknesses so that they're not as much of a weakness or, whatever? But you said to recontextualize these things. What does that mean? And what's the advantage of that over simply just sticking with what you're good at?
Well, because I think, especially in a high performance space, it's very easy to see where your weaknesses are.
Yeah.
And it's very easy to place the reason why you're sucking at the moment on those weaknesses. And it's very easy for the aforementioned two things that I said to become part of a deeper, more core belief system. So I say recontextualize your weaknesses. Like, one, what are they? What are your weaknesses? Maybe it's not as bad as you think.
Right.
Okay. Well, that's good. I don't have to work as hard on X as I thought. I'm not saying I need to ignore it, but great. I can let that one lie. Or it might actually be the thing that's really biting you in the butt.
Right.
All right. And again, at high level, when we're talking, I once announced a World Cup race, a final, and there's 8 people that fit on the gate, 8 people that crossed the finish line, and 7 of them were on the same second.
Wow.
Okay. So you want to talk about recontextualizing things, right? You want to, So when someone says, I just want to be fast, it's like, well, you're fast. That's where where the weakness really shows up or the strength really shows up. I will always say double down on your strengths, always, because your strengths will take you a lot further than your weaknesses will. I will say don't work on your weaknesses at the expense of your strengths. You only want to be just better than you were at your weaknesses. That's it. So I'll use a light scale just because it's easy. If you're I'll call it you could be a world-class, use tennis or golf, right? Tennis, you're a world-class tennis player, world-class. That means you're ranked, you are on the tour, you are making money. Okay. You're already, as far as life is concerned, you're already winning.
Yeah.
But fair enough. Within that world, you might be like 20 and you want to be top 10. And maybe one of your weaknesses is serve returns. I want you to double down on your strength, which might be serving. I want you to double down on strength, which might be speed or getting to the ball. If you can, as you put it, shore up your weakness to go from a 5 in serve returns to 6, what do you think that'll do for you exponentially over how many matches and games?
I see. Right. So it's the incremental improvement of the weakness can translate into a big improvement.
The recontextualizing is, because people say this, I suck because. And if you keep saying that to yourself, guess what?
Yeah.
You do suck because of that. At least that's how it's going to come out. That's going to affect the result.
Let me just kind of throw a practical scenario, because we talked about this earlier about how it's not sufficient to be a really good clinician. And even if you are, that doesn't guarantee that you're going to be successful in the marketplace, right? Because there's business acumen. There's the field of functional medicine has changed so radically with the advent of the internet. And, there was a time when I first started doing online consults where if you had a WordPress website, that was considered an internet presence, and people would find you and they would call you. And now we have social media and Facebook advertising and all this. It's a completely different game. So when you say double down on your sense, so again, I'm trying to give you a specific scenario that's applicable to the audience here. You have a clinician who has reasonable clinical skill and expertise as a clinician. So knowing more, going to more seminars may not necessarily improve their skill in that sense, but they're not good. They're not very well organized in a business sense. They don't have a cohesive marketing strategy. They don't have, say, a brand or a brand identity. They haven't positioned themselves so that the market can understand who they are and what they do. So I hope I'm not putting you on the spot, but does that jive with what you're saying about double down on your strength? Because
so when I say, so when you, from a business standpoint, every business has their strengths. I mean, the SWOT analysis, strength, weakness, opportunity, and threat. What I'm talking about is more from a personal standpoint.
Gotcha.
Not everyone is good at everything type thing.
Yeah.
So and I work, and I just reviewed a personality assessment with an athlete. And I have some people do their actual strengths from Gallup, but we see, and I say, okay, this is the personality makeup. How does this help you? How does this hurt you? Right? And then the next question is, what are ways we can develop, which is build the muscle, or compensate, which to speak in business terms is outsource it possibly.
Sure.
Right? Now, look, I'm not asking you to be a marketing expert. I'm asking you to market. You aren't a marketer. You are a clinician. I get that. However, now that you recognize the marketing or lack thereof is the thing biting you in the butt, what can you do about it?
So in that context, then doubling down on your strength could be just simply outsourcing your marketing, because that's your weakness. You're not good at it. And you might do better to improve your patient communication skills or.
Well, look, here's the thing. If you are that good of a clinician and you're doubling down on it, and you just did, say you, again, just like tennis, the serve return, if you got one extra client a month, okay? I'm not like, that's not that much, right? A month, but you were that good of a clinician, but that stupid ad you ran, that kind of sucked, but you ran it.
Yep.
Got that person in there, and you changed that person's life. What do you think happens to your referrals?
Sure. Yep.
What do you think happens to your marketing based on the referral? So
right.
we're looking. So when I say recontextualize weaknesses, because sometimes your weaknesses, you're inherent, right? Your inherent can be strengths. But again, my whole thing is, or one of the things I should say, is to learn to not lie to yourself, which is really hard to do. And that's why I'm saying recontextualize it. Because when you say I suck because I can't blah, 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 well, that might be why you're not doing well. It doesn't mean you suck, right? And that's the recontextualizing it. It's reframing this to mean something more accurate versus this blanket, I failed, or it's not worth it.
Right.
It might not be worth it, but have it not be worth it because, all of the other reasons we spoke about earlier, because it's probably not what you really want. It doesn't serve you, all these things.
Right.
Because no matter what you choose to do or whatever endeavor you plan to embark upon, it's going to include some suck.
Yes.
There's no way around
it. No, the work is hard. So it seems to me, and I think this relates to something else that I had wanted to talk to you about is about, and you mentioned this earlier, you used the word belief. I would imagine that recontextualizing involves a couple of things. Number one, you have to see yourself with more clarity to understand if what you think is a weakness or an obstacle really truly is or is not, or if the problem's something completely different. But again, on your website, you said your beliefs about yourself, the world, and others dictate your attitude, your behavior, and your results.
Mm-hmm.
And so is there a distinction between belief and understanding, or are they related? Are they the same thing? Is there overlap there?
So to me, understanding is more related to knowledge.
Okay.
So like, I'll use religion, and I'm not saying it to be provocative, but religion it's a belief business.
Sure.
And I don't mean business by pejoratively. I mean it.
Yeah. No, I understand.
It's in the business of belief, literally.
Yeah.
Right. If you're Christian, you choose to believe in Jesus Christ as your Lord, as your Savior.
Yeah.
Great. That's fine. You may say you know Him through your experiences, but again, that starts to cross over into this experienced thing versus this kind of held value, if that makes sense.
Yep.
And so we walk around the world, we humans, myself included, with beliefs. And when I begin a seminar, I ask these questions, the world is, right? Functional med is, right? And then people kind of start throwing out stuff. My work is, this job is, right? Parenting is, like, those people are, right? And then you start, I am, right? Usually gets quiet. But those are beliefs. Self, others, world. Self, other, world. Right? And so even another global belief, being a clinician, right? Just about, what it is to be a clinician. That's somewhat of a global belief, right? There's no money in whatever. Pick your, okay, well, that's a belief you're operating by. Well, if that's a belief you're operating by, well then, and your task is to make money in a thing that there's no people that you believe can't make money. So that's definitely going to reflect some kind of attitude because the math doesn't match up. So now we're, right, there's no money in psychology. Okay. What do you do, sir? I'm a psychologist. Okay. So how's that attitude going to affect my going out and getting business or finding business or thinking that there's business to be had? Right. So that's just my attitude. Right. And then what am I actually going to do? There's going to be actually a lot of stuff I don't do. I'm not going to make an extra call. I'm just, I am going to wait passively for somebody. And then actually to confirm the belief, I'm not going to do anything because there's no money in psychology. It has to match up. And the result will be that I'm just getting by.
Yeah.
It's that simple. And it happens, boom, quick. And sometimes we have those beliefs. We're not even aware of the beliefs we carry around.
Right.
So we have beliefs about ourselves, others, and world. You might believe you're the best clinician, but I would, for some of those people who aren't, after we get past defining what it is they want and what would be successful, okay, well, what's holding you back? And that's where we start getting into the belief work and the money scripts and all that other stuff. Because a lot of people in the helping profession have a problem with making money in the helping profession.
I was just going to say that because I've had the privilege of traveling and teaching seminars since 2008, right? So 15 years, something like that. I've spoken to a lot of people in a lot of practitioners in different phases of their career and also different degrees of success when we define it just strictly as you have a busy practice and you're making money. Mm-hmm. And it surprises me how many practitioners who I believe are good clinicians have this poverty mindset. In fact, she's actually a client of mine. She's a nurse practitioner and a functional nurse practitioner. And we were going over a test that I had run with her. And I said, have you seen one of these? Do you do these in your own practice? And she said, no, I don't get a lot of luck getting people to pay for tests like this. And my first thought in my head, I didn't voice it. My first thought was, really? I run these all the time and I don't have any problem. And so there's, I guess part of this is limiting beliefs and empowering beliefs. And I know you can go to the extremes in both of those. Like you can believe things about yourself that are just ridiculous. Like really, you're not that good of a clinician. I know you think you are, but you're really not. You're just kind of average. Yeah. But, I've had a lot of people say, well, I can't make any money doing functional medicine. They're seeing a lot of people, but they're not asking to get paid because, well, this person is, they have these problems and so how do you flip the script, I think is the way to say it, so that people start to believe things that give them hope and give them a pathway to opportunity. And more importantly, how do you identify if someone's limiting to belief is about other people versus about themselves, or in general about how the world works?
Great. So I have a very specific tool I use, which was a gift from a fellow clinician, Dr. Rob Irwin, who was my mentor, and then we became business partners later. And it's called the Belief Matrix. Belief, feeling, action, result. That's the order of operations. You have a belief, you have a feeling, you have an action result. I'm oversimplifying.
Yep.
But the purpose of going through that matrix is to say, okay, what's a negative result that you didn't like in your life or business? And you could just pick something. Didn't meet goal, right? Didn't meet monthly goal, right? Okay. Well, what led to that? What actions led to that? Well, right. And then you start getting into the calls that weren't being made, or the procrastination, or the whatever it might be. Watch too much TV. You can, there's a lot of stuff that leads to losing.
Yes.
Right? And then, what kind of attitude would a person have that wouldn't make the extra calls or watch or procrastinate? Well, fear, doubtful, unmotivated, and then they start going through these feelings. Sometimes overconfidence is in there, right? Sometimes. Okay, well, what belief would drive those feelings? What belief would drive me? There's no money in functional medicine, or no sales are being made in the recession, or nobody's growing a business right now, whatever it might be. And some of those are global, right? The recession, the business, the market, but some of them might be self, right? I'm not good at sales, or I don't think I should have to sell to become, right? Whatever the belief might be. Right. But usually you can trace it back to a belief that's driving that result. It might be global. It might be about other people, right? No one likes acupuncture. People are scared of needles. Those might be true, but if you're operating under that as a belief,
right,
well, then why are you an acupuncturist? Right? But these types of things, right? Or, people don't, whatever it might be. I'm too short to be a basketball coach. I don't know, whatever you want to, but these are the beliefs that drive the rest of the thing. Next step. Okay, we found the belief. We think, right? And usually it's pretty accurate. Okay, well, of the belief, feeling, action, result, what's the one thing most in your control? Action. Because feelings kind of, I mean, someone punches you in the face, it's going to hurt. You're going to feel the pain. You're going to feel angry. You're going to feel sad. That comes to you before. You don't have to think about that.
Yep.
And we know it's bad. It is bad when people hit us. Okay. Okay. But you can change the action, right? You're going to fight back. You're going to call the police. What are you going to actually do about this? Get some ice. Like, there's all kinds of things you can do. So you can always adjust your action. And so I stress people. So the two actions they can change right away. One is language. Changing that language, like learning how to speak to yourself in a way that encourages you. I'm not saying denying what is. I actually say be brutally honest and radically accept. Yes, you lost. Yes, you're not good at dashboards. Okay, great. Good you know that. What are you going to do about it? Action, right? We change our actions to do the right thing, even though we might feel a certain way, even might even have a belief that's certain. We can just focus on the action to take that might lead us in a better direction. That will then start to change the result, which in turn will start to change the belief and the attitude, and then it'll be a what's the word? A positive cyclical pattern versus a negative cyclical pattern. That's the tool.
Is there? What's the ripest field for rapid improvement? Is it to start with faulty beliefs about yourself, other people, or the world, or does it just simply vary with the person and the circumstance?
I don't think that. I don't think it's to me. I mean, it's interesting. You said rapid improvement. Change is instant and slow at the same time. Oh, I'm going to get a little philosophical.
Okay.
Right. So it's both instant and it takes a long time. Instant in that once you truly make a decision, which is a behavior, an action, like once you decide to actually do a thing or move toward the change you want, okay, we've set a new course. That's instant. I've changed direction.
Right.
I don't know how long it takes to get the ship from, Nome, Alaska to Puerto Vallarta. I really don't. And even if it's the fastest ship in the world, there's tides and there's currents and there's wind and there's life, there's the world, right? Like it's gonna fight through some stuff.
Right.
But I will say that if you can attack, it's not a matter of like saying, oh, you have a global belief that's this, or because we have so many beliefs on top of beliefs, right? So there's like these hierarchy of values that we have. But once you start getting at the core ones, and deep down people, even if they don't want to admit it, they kind of know them, but they just, they're shoved in a very special place. But once you start to unravel that and at least give people the tool to make it okay to at least admit that they really believe that whatever, one, it starts not, that big dragon in the cave is more like a lizard. And then two, you can actually, it's like, oh, well, actually, it's a gecko and it's kind of cute and it has an English accent and it's funny, right? Like it's recontextualizing it again, right? It starts to mean something different. It starts to, or even cease to be. You can actually start to believe something else. Again, religion is a great example of this. I used Christians, but if you think of the born again Christian, right? Someone evangelized to them. They were exposed to this thing, this concept, and they chose to believe it, right? Choosing, decision, action. They choose to bring this on. I accept, right? Radical acceptance of this belief system, right? Which then gives them maybe courage or a sense of belonging, and you just keeps going, right?
Yeah.
And hopefully not entitlement and I'm better than, right? So two sides to everything. But my point is, you can, whether it's global or about others or about yourself, if we still can hold them. They're still ours, right? They're still our beliefs. And if they're not serving us, and if you can start to unravel them a bit, my guess is if you can work through that one belief, whether it's self, world, or others, and start to work that chain in a positive or pro or adaptive manner, that will probably cascade into other beliefs shifting or changing.
Right. It's amazing how
Whether
it's all
rapid or not, I don't know, but it does happen. I mean,
yeah.
quicker than you can. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's amazing how all of these concepts are intertwined, and I would imagine part of the art form of being a psychologist and a mindset coach is to figure out which strings to pull on. You know, it's kind of a knotted, tangled mess, and you got to find the end before you can unravel it. And finding that end is probably more art than it is science when you come down to it. I want to be respectful of your time. We've been on for quite a while, so I truly appreciate this.
Yeah, you're welcome. This has been great.
Well, and I would invite you back because there's a whole bunch of stuff that has come up in my mind as we've been talking. And, you know, maybe at some point we can have more deep conversations about specific circumstances or types of people. But let me just kind of ask this one last question, and then we'll kind of wrap things up, and we'll talk about how people can reach out to you and where they can buy your book. Do you think it's applicable to people in functional medicine? We'll deal with that in a couple of seconds. But there is one of the things that I saw on your website that said successful but miserable. Right. And that kind of goes back to that story of that young doctor that I talked to in Manhattan. And I understand that there's a lot of people that are successful and miserable. There's a lot of people that are unsuccessful and miserable. But what do you say to the person who has business success? And I guess this goes back to firing on all cylinders, right? Those domains of more, better, and happier, and the concepts that they relate to. How do you help someone understand? I don't even know the question, Jay.
Yeah, I think I'll just tell you.
Yeah, please.
The question to them is so questions are great. And I'll tell you why specifically is because they're pattern interrupts. In order for you to ask, when I ask you a question, and if you are somewhat engaged in the conversation, not even truly, you have to stop to think, to formulate an answer. I don't care if it's right or wrong. I just know it's a pattern interrupt.
Sure.
Right. So the question I ask to the successful but miserable: are you brave enough to give up the current definition of success for something bigger? Your current definition of success.
Yeah.
How much is that worth to you? And that's the money question, literally and figuratively.
Yeah.
Because if it's not worth anything, then let's get busy with finding a way to accept this. Successful, right? Finding a way to accept some miserableness.
Yeah.
But if you're like miserable, like in the truest sense, then you're gonna have to work that Venn diagram.
Yeah.
What's it, and it might be, yeah, it's so interesting. I don't know many people who would argue too much now. Maybe pre-2020 they would have, but I think now people have gotten the memo. Dr. Ed Osborne, who's a chiropractor turned marketing genius,
yep.
literally, he did a Facebook about, like a live or something, about how COVID, and how the pandemic, I should say that because I don't want us to get pulled off or anything. But just how the pandemic had really exposed people. They exposed people's businesses. It exposed people's health. It was probably the most brilliant thing I had ever heard, because he was very right. it exposed some business holes. It exposed your health. Like there was people who were more scared than others because they were in a certain age. Not to say age group, you don't control that, but definitely, maybe you were carrying too many lbs. Maybe you weren't running around the block as much as you could have or should have. Those types of things. So I think people are ready for this conversation. But that money question, how much is it worth to you? I think people have gotten the memo and they're like, actually, yeah, I could stand to see, do less hours in the office, or less, earn a few bucks less every year to, and look, I'm not talking about someone who's in survival mode. I totally understand that. I get that. And I understand the sacrifices one makes when they're starting a career, all of that. But even then, you're starting your career, you're crappy hours. It's like, you know what? If what it takes is for you to be up at 6 or 5:30 in the morning and run around the block and do some push-ups, do that.
Yeah.
Do that. That helps, right? If you got that commute, like and you're a little burnout, call the old friend, right? Plan the next trip or whatever it might be with your wife or whomever, or the next get together with the guys or the girls or whomever it may be. Do that, But if it's not, make it. You want to find a way to make your whole life important, not just the work. Because what's important gets done.
Yeah, it's and it sounds quirky and maybe trite, but I think you have to understand what feeds your soul, right? And I mentioned, and I've said this on the podcast before, that in 2020, my wife and I sold everything we owned, and including 20 acres in South Carolina. Bought a truck and an RV, and we've been living in a 300 square foot RV for 2.5 years now. And quite literally everything I own is in my truck, in my RV, or in a small 5x10 storage unit in South Carolina. And it's not even full. And I don't know that I've ever been happier, to be honest. I don't know that but we kind of discovered what feeds our soul, because my wife and I are pretty much inseparable. That's part of it. And for us, it's adventure, exploration, and people. That means more to me than anything does. It means more to me than anything. And it also struck me when you were talking about in the field of functional medicine, as clinicians, we see things differently, obviously, than conventional doctors do. We see how all the physiological systems of the body work together, so we are an integrated whole. It seems to me that there's a problem. Like, also another saying is, like, doctors make the worst patients, and particularly when we're trying to treat ourselves, right? We're both the worst clinician and the worst patient at the same time. It seems to me that on one hand, we pay a lot of lip service to this concept of holism. Everything works together. But when it comes to our own lives and trying to build success in the larger, deeper meaning of that word, firing on all of these cylinders of more, better, and happier, I don't know that we put our money where our mouths are when it comes time to have that same attitude for ourselves. Agree or disagree, and we'll make this the final word.
Agreed. So I'm kind of a meme generator. But one of them, it's one of my essential. It's one of my, in my book. It's one of my essential truths, or questions. Is do I follow the advice that do I follow the advice that I give? And that's it.
Yeah.
And it's a curious thing that we don't give ourselves the same grace that we give others.
True.
I've noticed that once we learn to, or at least practice it, that you will be afforded more grace than you you could imagine.
Yeah.
One of my favorite words, grace. Another favorite word, agency. Love those two words.
Well, maybe
Trust.
we can meet again and talk about those things and why those things are important.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. So I've done a lot of work with chiropractors and functional med docs, especially as an athlete looking to heal faster or better or get an edge.
Right.
So I've had a lot of work and done a lot of work. But I took a training myself called NET, the neuro-emotional technique.
Mm-hmm.
And I love how when looking for something, they introduce the concept of, right? The concept of this, the concept of that, so they introduce these things. And so I've kind of readapted that to just more generalized words we use every day or actually stopped using. So the concept of agency, it's really, really important to me that people understand how much, I don't want to say power because that's kind of trite, but how much they can do, right? Like their own people, forget confidence or self-esteem. I'm talking self-efficacy here, like realizing what they are capable of.
Do you find
it's not even about how many things that people can do? It's just like, what can you do? Because there is something.
Yeah. Well, and that goes back to, step 2 in the belief matrix is action, right? Mm-hmm. Do you find that it's, is it a characteristic of people who are successful versus unsuccessful that some have seized and others have given up their agency? Whether they're aware of that or not,
well,
or whether,
I mean, look,
blame it on the system.
Yeah, so there's a lot of types, right? Personalities. And I get not everyone wants to or has the constitution or wants to run a company or, but again, I'll go back to there's plenty of that. There's plenty of people who, punch in and punch out on a time clock and are perfectly happy.
Perfectly happy, right?
And then to be candid with you as an entrepreneur, as a business, sometimes I look at them and I'm jealous. I'm like, oh man, like, because it has its like it has its appeal. You don't hunt and you do, and it is there for you. And there is, and you do put it away when you, for oversimplifying, of course, you do put it away when you go to, and you do, you look forward to the weekend and you look for, like there's, I was guilty of it too, but, I want people to look forward to every day, but I'm not going to look down on people who only look forward to the weekends.
Right.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Like if they're truly happy with their lives, good for them. Like you're the one who has to look at yourself in the mirror.
Yeah.
It's when it starts to be, you're not happy with who or what you're seeing. That's when it's like, all right, let's ask ourselves the hard questions. And if we don't like the answers, then it's like, okay, let's get to work.
Right.
That's it.
Yeah.
Whether you're running your own, whether you're a captain of industry or whether you're, plugging into company X and cubicle Y. But the responsibility to your life is still the same.
It's still the same, right? Yeah.
And that's where I come in.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So final thing is, what kind of advice would you give to the functional medicine practitioner who feels like they're stuck in a rut, whatever that might mean? And if you need me to create some scenarios, I can certainly do that. But
because one, recognize that part of that is normal for anyone who's been doing a thing for a while.
Mm-hmm.
I think the question to ask is not why is this happening as much as it is what is it I'm truly what is it that I want to move toward. And it's a scary question because it could be that maybe this profession has a shelf life or the way you're doing it. It could be. But if that's the answer, seems to me, I'm not saying it's easy, but it seems to me you have the freedom to do other things. And
Right.
what are those things? And chances are, if it has a shelf life, there's probably a reason. And that's not so bad. You might, like I said, you might be surprised what's on the other end.
And
the beauty of being a licensed clinician is that you do have a shingle that you can always hang up and get an hourly rate for. Part of that's good. The other piece is that's the piece that keeps people from branching out further when they're feeling compelled to.
Right.
But that would be the first thing. The other thing, if you're in a rut, is let's change it up. Let's, get into some different groups with some other people from other professions,
right,
and see how things are done, or just start rubbing elbows with other people, or, let's change it up a bit.
Yeah.
But literally for the sake of changing it up.
For the sake of changing it. And I like that idea. Like, I love the mental imagery of being stuck in a rut, because you've got these defined sides that you're stuck in. And sometimes all it takes is just to pick your head up and look out beyond those barriers to get a different perspective.
Yep.
Well, cool. Let's leave it there. How can people get your book, and how does the book relate to people in our profession?
Yeah. So the book it's easy. It's More, Better, Happier. And it's available on Amazon. Where else?
There you go.
Amazon.com, More, Better, Happier, Dr. Jason Richardson. Please buy it. And how it relates, I think it relates to, well, it's interesting. One, I think it'll help you in your profession, because it's coming from a person who's in the helping profession. But I think it helps articulate some of the questions your clients or patients are already asking of themselves, right? So at the very least, reconfiguring this ethos to suit your practice can be beneficial for your clients. And if you dare answer a lot, and there's a lot of questions in there, if you dare just take a notebook next to it and start answering these questions and going through it as if it were a notebook, I think you might be surprised at what you find for yourself and how you might want to redesign your life moving forward.
Do you talk about the belief matrix in there?
So I talk about it very quickly. There is a book prior to More, Better, Happier. I call More, Better, Happier kind of the prequel, which came out. But the book before that's called It's All BS.
Okay.
And the BS stands for belief systems. So, get both of them on Amazon.
Yeah, I was going to say, get them both. Get a package deal.
Yeah.
Where can people?
So you can
reach
find me on
Instagram. Yeah. So you're on Instagram.
Instagram
at real Dr. J Rich. And
you got it.
Yes. Are you? And I'll put links in the episode description so people can reach you.
So LinkedIn.
Yep.
LinkedIn, Instagram, at real Dr. J Rich, and my website. That's www.drjasonrichardson.com. That's www.drjasonrichardson.com.
Awesome. I'll put all those links in the episodes or in the episode description so people can find you. Thank you. I appreciate this. I really enjoyed the conversation, and
that was great. Thank you.
I'd be more than willing to have you back anytime.
Yeah. Well, let's make a plan of it, and I appreciate you having me. It was awesome.
All right, Jay. Thanks. I appreciate it.
You're welcome. Take care.